welcome to D-ConneXion TV. I'm Donzalay Powell with D-ConneX LLC. Thank you for tuning in today. Today we're going to talk about the subject of diversity and inclusion. I am so excited to have these guests with us here today, and I would like for you to each introduce yourself.
I'll start. That's okay. Hi, Donzalay. Thanks for having me. My name's Roxanne Bethune. I am the owner of Alliance Synergy Group. It's a diversity business consultant. I have been in business now for 5 years. I have 25 plus more years in diversity consultant. One of the, I guess, the staples that I started with my business was the Music City Center. We were charged with reaching at least 20% participation. We exceeded that. We got 30, went on to work with the Ascend Amphitheater, currently did the fairgrounds, and now I'm out at the airport.
Wow, okay, great.
Hi, I'm Ariel Ellis. I am owner of Advisory 83. We are a communication consultancy that specifically focuses on strategic planning and curriculum and development for organizations. So many times organizations will have a strategic plan around diversity and inclusion, but the pieces that they operationalize aren't really in place. And sometimes organizations will want to have a conversation about diversity and inclusion. They want to conduct trainings, but they don't necessarily have curriculum, or they don't have a trainer in-house to be able to do that for them. So we're able to help them actually bring that to fruition and implement and execute some of those things. A few of our clients are Sherian here in Nashville, AIG, Microsoft, and we have several clients nationally and internationally.
Awesome, thank you.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. Allison Quintanilla Platzmeyer. I own AQP Consulting, which specializes more in nonprofit consulting, whether that's their HR policies, cultural sensitivity, creating diverse and inclusive workforces, and I also teach for Nashville Community Education as well.
Great. I want to say, I follow a lot of you ladies, and you're awesome, and that's why you are here today. So again, thank you for coming. So if you could, any of you, if you would take a chance and just kind of explain, what's your definition of diversity and inclusion?
Well, I'll start. I think diversity and inclusion has become a buzz phrase, unfortunately, but I think there's a highlight in that it's now a real conversation, and organizations are forced to be able to figure out how to make it real and how to make it actionable, how to make it an operational piece within their actual culture. We see that there's a shift demographically across the U.S., and so organizations are figuring out ways to respond to that internally and externally. So I see diversity as a measure, the thing that we can count, the similarities and the differences that are visible to us, but I see inclusion as the mechanism, the thing that allows us to be able to make diversity come to life, and so you can't have one without the other.
She said it very well. I'll just tag a little bit on with that. When I think about diversity, of course, coming from the arena of construction, it does start with inclusion. I think one of the things that we have to do is understand our differences. And when you talk about understanding each other's differences, it becomes something that you have to educate a person on. Because of the fact that we didn't all grow up together, we don't really know what it is that we don't know. And so when I think of diversity and inclusion, you have to start with education and let person know exactly what it is that you expect of them, but make sure that they understand it's an inclusive as well.
Yeah, I mean, there was a popular quote going around social media of diversity as being asked to the dance, inclusion, or diversity is being invited to the dance and inclusion is being asked to dance. And I mean, I think there's a little bit of a problem with that, of it perpetuates the power dynamic of somebody still has to ask you to dance, and so they're morphing it into more inclusion is choosing the music, or inclusion is being on the party planning committee. It means nothing getting the voices and perspectives to the table if you're not going to value them and you're not going to allow them to really be a part of the organization and the work that you're doing.
Yes, very good. So what is some of the, I guess, the best advice that you could give a company that's wishing to increase their diversity and inclusion? And keep in mind, I do understand there's kind of the HR side where it might be hiring or developing staff, and then there's the other side, so it could be construction companies or contracts with the federal government that have mandates. So I do understand both sides, so feel free to speak on either or both.
Well, for me, I think it starts at the top. I think if you don't have a culture of educating people on diversity, and your guys, the leader at the top, is not bringing that down to his lower management, to the supervisors, to the folks that are out in the field, to the people that are in the office, it's not going to go anywhere. So it has to start at the top. It has to be somebody that's serious about it. He's going to put some policies in place. He's going to put some programs in place. He's going to have someone that comes in and talks about those policies and programs. And it's an ongoing conversation. It's not just doing it one time, saying, hey, waving the flag, we've got a program in place, and check it off, and then we're done. It's not. It has to be something that the culture of that particular industry, that particular company has bought into, and it's going to be an ongoing. It's not just going to stop.
Mm-hmm. And to add on to that, I think that the question of we are looking to increase, or the problem or the situation that we're seeking to make a shift, right? Mm-hmm. An organization has to ask themselves why they want to do that. Do we want to do that because we need to see profits and revenue change? Are we seeking to do that because we need to be able to, we notice that we have a void within the talent landscape of our organization? Mm-hmm. Folks at the top have to know their why before they decide to pursue a real functional diversity inclusion strategy and undertake that, so that ultimately it really will be baked in to their organization. And if they don't know their why, then that's going to be a problem.
Mm-hmm. It helps with that becoming part of the culture.
Absolutely.
Hey, we are doing this and this is the reason.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we have to go beyond our traditional avenues. I think we tend to surround ourselves with people that are very similar to us, have very similar interests. And so thinking beyond of like, how do we target other groups and make sure that they have the information to be able to be at the table, I think. One of the examples that I like is, vagina monologues, right? They have a monologue in it that is, they beat the boy out of this girl, and it's about a transgender experience, mm-hmm. and they cast a cis woman in it. And they said, well, no transgender women tried out. Well, where did you put the tryouts? Where were you spreading the information, right? You can't just say, well, nobody came if you weren't being intentional about getting that information in front of those communities.
Absolutely. So that can be multiple ways, and people really do have to kind of take a step back and think about that. You might have your typical publications that you look at, mm-hmm. Social media that you follow, but if I'm trying to attract someone that is not necessarily like me, you have to think outside of the box. Hey, maybe I really don't know where I need to be looking, so maybe I need to reach out to someone to say, could you help me with this? Let's just make sure that I'm in the right track, so that some of those places where the populations that I am looking for will be able to see it and be able to participate. Mm-hmm. So yes, definitely mm-hmm. agree with that. So have you all ever been a part of a highly effective organization that had a robust diversity and inclusion program where you felt like, hey, they had it, they were doing it? And any thoughts on those programs that might be helpful to others?
I have not.
Well, not as an employee. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I can speak to that on the client side a little bit, but not fully. Right. I have not identified a client who is winning in every single area of diversity and inclusion. I think locally, Assyrian is a client, and they're doing a really great job with the leaders that are there, and they've had to kind of pull some things together. From the origins of just establishing a diversity inclusion a function, which was not established, and so I'm very grateful to see the growth that they've experienced. I will use one organization that I got a chance to work with, which is Johnson & Johnson, and I spent some time in their headquarters in New York. And Johnson & Johnson lands on the top 50 Diversity Inc. list every year. But at that moment that I was working with them, they had everything in place except for a communication strategy. Mm-hmm. They were winning awards, they were making impact in the community, their hiring was great, they were making all these things happen, but not a lot of people knew about it. Only within the industry or amongst their peers and their competitors was their work, made apparent. So mm-hmm. Other than that, no, I've not seen or been a part of or been internal to an organization that is winning in diversity and inclusion in every area.
Right. And let me just add, I don't think that's a realistic goal.
Yeah.
Because we've got the demographics, you're dealing with 4 different generations in the workplace now. I think diversity and inclusion is going to be evolutionary. It's going to continue to grow. It's going to continue to change. If you want to see the success of it, it has to be a continuous moving into the direction of tweaking this, tweaking that, putting things in place that's going to actually help it be what it needs to be for your company or for the other company. But I don't think it's ever going to be perfect.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with Roxanne. Unfortunately, in the nonprofit sector, I feel like DEI falls to the bottom of the list because it's funding and it's mission impact, and it's just not as high a priority as I would like to see in the small organizations that I've been working with. Because again, people that found nonprofits fill their board with their friends and their family, and then it's really hard getting beyond that to the next step of like,
Right.
okay, let's branch outside our comfort zone, let's get some other people, let's reach out to some better networks. And so I think that there's a long way to go, even more so probably than in the for-profit and the nonprofit sector.
That makes sense.
Mhm.
So what big picture strategies can you suggest to get a true buy-in from an entire company? So from hourly up to C-suite.
Big picture.
You know, I don't know if it's about big picture.
Okay.
I think it's about shifting culture and about the mindset of the individuals who are working in that organization, and realizing that employees are also consumers and customers of other brands and other organizations, and they're donors of, you know, of other entities, and that no one person is a monolith. And I think if we, you know, if we go big picture, then we kind of go back to what Roxanne kind of warned us against, is trying to use diversity and inclusion and frame it as a fix, or as we've done it and now we've arrived and we don't have to do anything else.
Exactly.
And so I think big picture, if we were to actually frame big picture, I think the goal would be to get to equity. Because we've talked about diversity and inclusion, and that's very real, and we need both. One can't exist without the other. But ultimately, once we start to talk about equity, it means that this organization is seen as being equitable and fair and respectful, and creating value for everyone that comes in contact with it.
Right.
And let me just, I think before we can get to that big picture, diversity and inclusion has to be non-negotiable. It has to be something that you are going to look at this cultural shift within your organization, and you've committed to it. It's going to be through the social. It's going to be through your outside relationships. It's going to be with your office relationships. You're going to look at the Good Old Boy Network and figure out how does that not fit into, or it does fit into, diversity and inclusion. Because I think what people don't want to talk about is that we talk about diversity and inclusion. We have trainings, we bring people in, we put these programs in places, we put these policies in places, but we go and have a beer with the good old boy. And we're talking the same language that we've talked for 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. How do you get that language to change? And that's what diversity and inclusion is all about. I think equity is a great part of it, because I think one of the things that we've all looked at is that, no, we don't get the same pay that the men get. We don't get the same pay as it looks ethically. You know the word I'm looking for. Okay, it'll come out. But I think all of those things come into play when you talk about big picture. We have to just peel that onion back and basically look at all of that. It's a hard conversation. It's not something that everybody wants to talk about, but because we have such a changing society, I don't think we have a choice. So that's why I said it's non-negotiable. Sit down, take the Band-Aid off, rip it, and just let's sit and have the conversation. And everybody is not going to agree because of the fact that you've got such a diverse community. But where can we meet in the middle? Where can we make this thing work for the whole?
And I think what you're speaking to, it's basically kind of having some of those teeth in place, and it goes back to your why. because at the highest level, if you don't really know the why, you give up very easily because it's like, I'm getting pushback, and these are my friends. These
That's
are my
right.
coworkers that I see that are right across the hall, and I have to deal with this. So yes, that definitely makes sense. Anything from you, Alex?
Well, yeah, I agree with it being non-negotiable. I'm really proud of the nonprofit like funders that are now making diversity of the board a requirement for fundraising. I think that that's a nice step forward, and I've made it clear on any board that I choose to sit on, like that's #1 priority for me. But I think another thing is that we all have to be accountable. I think people rely on people of color, women of color, to lead those conversations, and they shouldn't have to. It's not their responsibility to educate you
Their sole
about
responsibility. I agree.
That
I
is so
totally
funny.
agree.
Yes, I've definitely worked at some places where if there's a question that they, let's just say, related to African Americans, well, Don's like, well,
Oh,
I don't know. I, in that area, what you're talking about, I really,
Yeah.
I don't do that, or I don't know. Why are you asking me?
Yeah.
So I get it. Yeah,
Yeah,
sometimes
absolutely.
kind of targeted on that.
Oh, absolutely.
So let's talk about some of the things that might be a little difficult. So have you been in some, what are some of the most challenging, I guess, parts of implementing quality diversity and inclusion in some of these companies? Like, what have some of your major hiccups been, or some of the things that on your way home you're thinking, man, they're just not gonna get it?
A good bit of my work in research is around cultural competency. Competency being, how do we understand things? And when we understand the thing, where do we place it in priority of where it falls and how we use it, right? And the biggest thing that I kind of run up against when I'm doing this work, or even sitting on a board as probably the only woman, or the only African American, or the only millennial. I got three. I got three.
All those
right? Is that there are generally folks at the table who don't have a certain level of competency enough to understand why this is critical. Right. Their life does not look like the organization that their competitors have, right? Or the demographics that they've been exposed to is just, you know, it's not real to them. Or again, going back to the why, the company is profitable. And because the company is profitable, there's no need to switch up or do anything different, or appeal to a different consumer base, or appeal to a different type of talent to bring them into the organization, because we're seeing the best profits we've ever seen, right? Or we're doing very well. We don't have any lawsuits. We don't have anybody, any EEOC complaints or anything like that. So I think the biggest thing that I run up against is competency, is that there is a lack of understanding about the differences that we have, right? There's a lack of exposure with those differences. And as a result, if I don't understand and I've never been exposed to something, I'm not going to be competent enough to want to go after making a shift or making a change.
That's a good point. Did you?
Yeah, I mean, I think white fragility is a real thing. I mean, as you talked about in your thing, I'm sure if you had tried to just have a rational conversation about why that comment was inappropriate, people get on the defensive. Oh, I'm not racist. I have tons of black friends. You know, they go into those type of defensive. So I think that's probably like the biggest thing, is that people have a hard time accepting that sometimes they're going to misstep and sometimes they're going to say inappropriate things, and it's about learning and doing better. And also privilege, like, right? So people don't really seem to understand that as a concept of like, oh, if I came from a low income background, then I can't have privilege. But we all have varying degrees of privilege and varying lenses of privilege. You know, as women and as minorities, we each have different lenses. But, you know, I'm Latina, but I'm white passing. So then I've got more privilege than other Latinas. And so it's all figuring out where we are within that hierarchy and how that affects how we interact with each other. And again, being confident to go ahead and say that. Like, I've gotten a lot of pushback. I've even been let go for calling people out on that, and I've got to keep doing it. It'd be easy for me to go into another role and be like, okay, I'm going to keep my mouth shut because I don't want to lose my job, but do I really want to work for an organization that values that? So.
Become a consultant.
Become a consultant,
Well, both these ladies gave excellent points. I'm going to give it from the construction side. When I think about one of the things that this job becomes is that in government there are programs and policies in place that says that you need to do some diversity participation. What happens is that ultimately those construction companies that work on the government projects will do the diversity participation for that project. But when they go to the private sector, they're working on the private sector with no diversity participation because there's no requirements for diversity participation. So here I am, being in the business 25 plus years, I've got to re-educate those same contractors that worked on the government projects, but because of their relationship with that major construction company, they go and work with them on a non-government project. They don't have to do diversity. So when they come back to me, it's like re-educating them all over again. And I have such a passion for this till they just like, you never give up. No, I don't give up, because you have to understand this is not for me to do it just for this job. This is for you to take this to the next job that you go and work. So when I look at that in the big picture, yeah, that is a major, major problem, just because of the fact that I know in the construction industry, it's not something that's intentional, it's not something that's ongoing, and I've always got to deal with those guys that they didn't have to do it on this job, so why do I have to do it over here?
Right. So it definitely hasn't become the culture.
Oh, it
because
is not
otherwise
the culture.
You wouldn't do it on what you have to and not on the other.
It is not the culture.
Got
So
it.
there's an education there, ongoing, which means I have job security. So.
So have you participated on any diversity and inclusion task force? And if so, what types of actions or what types of tasks did they do?
Task
Or did you
force.
participate in? Or any groups that kind of are just specifically tailored to making sure that you kind of come together for D&I?
I think I wouldn't say task force, but I will say there have been a couple of initiatives throughout this past 5 to 7 years in my career. As I stated earlier, on the Music City Center, we put in place a 20% diversity participation. That was non-negotiable. If you came to the table without participation, you were deemed non-responsive. As a result of that, the city actually took that initiative and put it on major capital projects. And so it went into them looking at all of their capital projects. Since then, they've done some changes. They've got a new program that they've put in place, which is great, and we're happy about it. But when you think about task force, it's almost one of those things where, okay, let's put it in place and see how many people will follow. And that one did take off. So I would think that would be an initiative that we worked with.
So I do a good bit of work as a consultant, but also as I guess a community, leader in some respects, specifically in the communications industry, because that's my discipline as a trained communicator, in helping organizations figure out how to communicate more effectively around diversity and inclusion, the training, the strategic planning, things of that nature. And one of the initiatives that I've been involved in is the Public Relations Society of America. And with that organization, you have the decision makers who decide what we see on TV and what commercials we see and what gets ran on social media, on the brands, social media and things of that nature. And recently, we've seen a lot of brands and organizations drop the ball and misrepresent their consumer. And so my work with the Public Relations Society of America gives me opportunity to serve on task force and to serve on their National Diversity Inclusion Committee with public relations and communication professionals across the globe, and figure out how to make not only our industry more diverse, because that's one of the biggest things too. You don't have people who look like the people who they're communicating to making the decision. So that's one initiative, and then the other initiative is making sure that our practitioners are educated enough to know how to really make good decisions around diversity and inclusion. So it's a national initiative, and it's also some international pieces that are happening, and I'm very glad to be involved.
That sounds good.
Yeah, so I'm on the Middle Tennessee Society for Human Resource Management Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and so they're really pushing for their membership to be more inclusive in their HR policies and their hiring practices and in their training for onboarding new employees. Again, being a nonprofit professional, it's a weird niche for me to be in because usually we don't have HR committees. And then as far as specifically women, the American Association of University Women, I was on their Younger Women's Task Force, again, figuring out how we create and pave way for women in the workplace. And then I've recently started with American Mothers of how we help new women get back into the workforce if they've taken time off, or there's actually something in salary negotiation called the motherhood penalty that they found that you get a 5% penalty per child as a mother in the workforce in your salary negotiation, in addition to the huge wage gap we already have. And so American Mothers is working with legislatures and doing Day on the Hills to try to combat that as well.
Wonderful.
Wow. So, real quickly, let's just, if you could, and this could be just short sentences or just words that kind of pop into your head. If I'm out there and I just want to know what's really the benefit of this whole diversity and inclusion things, like what are the positives? Why do I even need to do this? What would you say the top ones are for you all?
Economic equity.
Equity.
Yeah, I mean, representation, being able to see yourself in your dream role, I think is really important.
Okay, yes, thank you so much. I always want to make sure that I open up the floor, give a chance for you. Are there any conferences, events, publications that you kind of suggest for those that might be interested in either working in diversity and inclusion, or say I'm an HR professional, I'm interested, hey, I need to beef up some things, and they kind of make that realization today? Any of the things that you can think of that, hey, the public just might want to know in order for them to become either more educated or for them to really be able to make some effective change?
I don't have a particular organization, but what I will say as it relates to diversity and inclusion is that just know that it's always and it will continue to be a learning curve. So
Yes.
continue seeking and never stop seeking, because it's always going to evolve.
Yeah, without to that point, without having a direct place to send people or a resource or an event, I always encourage organizations when I do trainings and strategic planning is to be human, because to be human means to be authentic
Absolutely.
and curious and compassionate. And as long as we're consistently doing that, I think we'll always make diversity and inclusion a priority.
Yes, great.
Yeah, from my perspective, so MT Sherm has a talent and tech conference. I think that that's a really great place to, I think it's every August. So go in there to kind of, again, broaden your scope. One of my clients is the Tennessee Educators of Color Alliance, so they do an education conference specifically for educators of color every June. Again, that's probably not even the people that really need the D&I training, but really continue looking for resources and educating yourself. Again, every time you feel that pushback or that need to get defensive, educate yourself. Push back with education, push back with trying to learn, and just try to be better.
All right. Well, again, thank you ladies so much for coming on today. And I just want to thank you all for coming to watch D-ConneXion TV.